All right, thank you guys. We're going to start. Thanks for waiting. I don't see anybody else in the hallway. Thank you for coming. This is the information session that we have scheduled to allow opportunity for questions on the new construction grant adjustment report that we've just released. It was available on our website Friday afternoon, but there were challenges with DGS server, and not everybody got an email that the report was actually available. So the report is here. We have the team with us that worked, that started the discussions that you recall at the implementation committee meeting regarding the methodology that we would follow for this report. And the team is Erin Kaneen, who's in the audience, Josh Rosenstein, Josh Damuth, and myself, Masha Lutzik, of the Office of Public School Construction. So what we'll do is we'll just do a brief introduction of why we're here, and then Josh Damuth will go through the quickly through the overview of the report, and then we can open the floor up for questions. If you have questions, please use the microphones over here and to come up and ask questions. If for those in the audience that are maybe watching, just a brief introduction, the Assembly Bill 127 requires the State Allocation Board to analyze the grants and costs of actual construction. We do this through the project information worksheet. We brought an item to the implementation committee this spring and summer regarding methodology for analyzing the data that we collected via project information worksheets. And we, as we said before, we're using those that were submitted to our office through March 31st of this year. That was our grouping that we focused on. The report that you see in front of you today pretty much follows the steps that we've outlined in those implementation committee meetings. As far as back in at those meetings, we talked about projects that we would be using for the study, projects that we would be excluding from the study, the formula that we would follow to determine the percent of state share in the project, and then we also talked about square footage analysis. We did use some additional filters once we found out how inconsistent the data was, and we can tell you briefly about those. The what else should I mention? So I will turn it over to Josh. He'll briefly go over different sections of the report, and then we'll open the floor up for questions. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just going to basically, I know the report's really fresh, just got released, so I'm just going to basically just give you a basic overview of how it's organized, why we organized it that way, and what we're trying to say, and what kind of data that will be presented to the allocation board. So if you, Josh, if you can go ahead and open it up here. I don't know if you'll be able to read that up there.
But maybe they can follow us
Yeah. Okay. So new construction grant adjustment report. Basically, when we design this report, we assume that the reader doesn't necessarily assuming that the reader is not completely familiar with our funding model. We have a lot of policymakers out there that need to be educated. It's been the SFP's been around since 1998, so we started off by just going through a basic overview of the funding model. Basically, our program, the three major components of our program is eligibility. How do you, there's a pupil grant, and then in addition to that, there's a supplemental grant. So basically, what we're trying to do is give the reader a basic background of how our grant structure, so that way, it's pretty complex. That way, our policymakers can take our report and make an informed decision based on the data we give them at the end. Basically, we actually met with Dr. Vincent from University of California, Berkeley. I'm going to be talking about some of the suggestions he gave us. One of the things he suggested was using something called descriptive statistics. This is a statistical analysis. It's taking a data set in order to try to draw a conclusion, which is what the law requires us to do with this report. So instead of doing like an inferential statistic model, which is basically taking the data set and drawing a definitive conclusion, we're basically just presenting statistics to the board, and in order to just basically paint a picture of what's really going on with the funding. So we started off by saying, okay, the grant adjustments basically have gone up kind of, well, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically that's what we did there. Here's information on supplemental grants, kind of so you can comparatively see what's going on. As you can see in 2004, is that? Or is that 2003, Josh? 2002, there was a big spike because there was a bond that got passed and there was an unfunded list that we had to fund. So it's kind of interesting. You can see, I think a lot of this there's a lot of reasons for this. I think a lot of it has to do with districts are better educated today, so they know how to get these supplemental grants better. I think maybe, I like to think that OPSC outreach has helped with that. Just helping, help get the money out, to where districts are eligible. But basically, we're just painting a picture of what's going on there. Some grants are independent and some grants are dependent, meaning that if the board makes an increase or a decrease to the pupil grant, it's going to affect other grants. So we want to make sure that the board got a picture of how that funding is given. And the way it's given is it's based I'd say the number one determinant is the number of classrooms in a project. It's basically kind of a one-size-fits-all grant with some supplementals where your number of classrooms determine your funding. Which leads us kind of to the next section. We wanted to give the board, we have basically with the project information worksheet, what in my opinion, or in our opinion, that we presented in the report, the richest data set that's available right now. It's all self-reported by school districts. So we wanted to give the board some examples of the stuff that we can determine. So we went through and basically talked about these are all the different types of projects that are represented here. We talked about there's new schools, there's addition projects. Projects range anywhere from 960 square feet portable to 309,000 square foot permanent schools. So, let me see here. We have different construction types represented. We also gave the board an idea of the types of facilities that are being built. There are obviously classrooms the largest. We have, and then we kind of said average square foot per facility. These are kind of the outdoor facilities. So just painting a picture, basically, we wanted to just give them a really good grasp of what types of projects are being represented here. So we also kind of provided a regional summary. There are, how many counties are there? 26 counties that were funded that were represented out of these 166 projects. And it's pretty much, I think it's pretty much a good random sampling, except for the fact that the obvious exception that we've excluded financial hardship projects that had a full and final apportionment, so that might kind of throw this off a little bit. So the key findings, let me just take you through that real quick. This is our point we're trying to make. There are some problems that we encountered that we feel that need to be addressed before we can take this further. One of the problems is that we feel has been addressed is we've had in the past a lack of data, but through ongoing collaboration with you guys and through school districts, we're building a very rich data set on construction costs. So that problem is being addressed through the project information worksheet. We also have, we talked about the program is driven by local control. The cost we analyze the cost per square foot in our data set. It ranges anywhere from $99 a square foot to $950 a square foot. There's a huge wide range. So there's kind of a lack of a standard for us to judge, to compare the funding with the costs, because it's difficult to say what is the state's responsibility in providing in providing funding. If you take the state's funding and you add the district's required matching share, what should you get with that? So we're having difficulty finding that line. So what we've done, kind of just to start that discussion, we've took the CDE Complete Schools report. Well, the CDE already started this by they studied, or Department of Education, I'm sorry. They studied 60 complete schools, I believe, and so they came up with the mean and median square foot per pupil. And so the first line is that. So for example, here we got the mean square foot per pupil for K-6 was 74. Well, then we compared that with, if you skip a line here, to the new schools. These are the new schools that were included in our study. The new schools are actually being built almost the same as CDE's recommendation, or not recommendation, but CDE's finding when they studied what they consider to be a complete school. So maybe there's somewhere the board can start if they want to make some kind of policy. For reference, under the lease purchase program, we used to have a set square footage per pupil. As you can see here in the report, it's considerably lower. And then the last line, we also included all projects. This is new schools in our study. This is all projects in our study. Obviously, all projects in our study are going to be much lower. The reason being because many of these projects are additions projects, and they're not going to include they don't always include the subsidiary facility like multipurpose gym. So, but we found that very interesting that the CDE Complete School is very close to new schools in our report. So maybe there's kind of a starting point based on what we're going to conclude on this. So, and then basically we're talking about this is an unclear funding model. It's a one-size-fits-all grant. It's very problematic. You get money based on the number of classrooms. It has nothing to do with, it doesn't take into account square footage per pupil. What type of construction are you using? What are you building? What's your facility component? So that makes it very hard for us to make any kind of conclusive findings. We also pointed out to the fact that 98 out of 166 of these projects under-requested. There's 4 reasons that we've outlined, so meaning that a lot of money was left on the table. There's a lot of reasons districts do this, and the law allows them to, and it's perfectly fine for them to do that, but we did point out that this will kind of throw off our study based on what we're trying to find. So, and then we summarized all that there. Disparity of project scopes, impact of local decisions affecting project costs, districts under requesting funding, and the nature of the funding model all interfere with our ability to compare the cost of construction with funding. So since many of our board members need this education, we've included this kind of we believe that this is a really important section. Then finally, the fun part. We've talked about, this is where we have our descriptive statistics. We've focused on the cost per square foot and the funding per square foot, and comparing the two to get the cost per square foot, funding per square foot, and percentage of state contribution. So what we've done is we've broken it down in, we've provided a summary. So you can see 2006 projects from July through December, 2007, 2008. We've provided minimum and maximum statistics, mean and median, and standard deviation. The standard deviation is basically a descriptive statistic that tells you how spread out is the data. The larger the standard deviation, the more spread out. So as you can see, the costs per square foot are much more spread out than the funding per square foot because we had a much wider variability in the data. Actually, we have a cool chart here. This is permanent new schools. We want to just say for permanent new schools, this is a histogram basically that kind of shows the funding per square foot. As you can see, it doesn't necessarily represent, doesn't look to be too much like a bell curve. There's a lot of projects here that range from $260 to about, this is about $500 a square foot right here. There's a lot of projects that go from $560 all the way up to $900 a square foot. And then right here is the funding, which is much more of a normalized curve, you can see. And then we've kind of put the two of them together so you can see the disparity between the funding and the costs here. So we have a market comparison. This was our best we could do to kind of compare with how much other types of projects are costing based on sale or cost. Doesn't include many important factors such as site development. It's simply there for informational purposes. Then basically what we've done is for each year we've provided descriptive statistics for each grade level, each type of construction, whether it's a new or an addition. We've provided mean and median cost per square foot, funding per square foot, percentage of state contribution, as well as kind of a weighted mean and median, which weights it depending on the number of projects that were funded in our sample set. Okay, and then we kind of drive to a conclusion here. Our conclusion basically was that costs, what is that, page 31? Costs vary, $99 a square foot to $950 a square foot. State funding varies from $53 to $379. Our ability to complete the study was underscored for the reasons I've already said in our key findings. You can read them there. We've included kind of another point here from the Lil Hoover report that went up in June of 2009. They did a report on bond spending, so we found that interesting and something that policymakers may wish to consider. Just has to do with significant money could potentially be saved statewide by establishing templates of architectural plans for school facilities. However, they do acknowledge in this quote that could be very problematic for California schools because there's lots of different types of climates and different regions and stuff that would have to go into that kind of policy. So basically, we're saying the gathering data is solved. We're collecting data through the project information worksheet. Some things to consider for the board: recast the funding model to make explicit rather than unstated assumptions. Basically, maybe define a square footage per pupil, declare state dollars per square foot, provide funding that scales with scope. So if a district's building a multi-purpose room, maybe we can give them more money. Maybe if district's only building portables, we give them the money according to that. And set life cycle cost-effective design as a standard. So that's basically it. Just really quick, I'm not going to go into too much detail. We have some appendices. I'm going to skip A and B. We provided a little bit of a history for folks in Appendix C, but mostly I just wanted to point out Appendix D and E. We've actually outlined all of the projects that were excluded and the reasons, and we've outlined that. The only thing that was new from implementation was we've excluded a small amount of outliers. There were projects that were way far outside of the normal. If basically when you draw those histograms and you have a curve, there are projects that are just way outside, like $1,800 a square foot. So we basically have taken the approach of in a statistical study that these outliers were extreme measurements that stood out from the rest of the sample and could be faulty because they either could be incorrectly recorded, very unusual. So basically those categories were cost per square foot, funding per square foot, cost per classroom, cost per pupil, percentage of state contribution, and square footage per pupil. And we took those out on either side. So there's kind of a small number. You can see in the chart which ones we took out. And then we have two appendices kind of giving the board more detail on the supplemental grants. And finally, for you statistical buffs out there in the room, we did a t-test on every single statistic. What a t-test does is we're just trying to basically quantify the value of the numbers that we've given, because we're not necessarily drawing an inference of the whole population, but we are trying to use this data to make a good conclusion to the best we can. So in order to quantify, some statistics are more meaningful than others. So as you can see, we did a margin of error for each statistic using a t-test. So you can kind of just see, for example, 2006 state contribution percentage we calculated was 52.97%, plus or minus 5% error. Now that is not entirely accurate because it's going to assume that the data is a normal distribution, which we can see from the graphs that it doesn't appear to necessarily be normal. We don't know, maybe it is, but we're assuming that over time, if you get an infinite number of these things, if it approximated a normal distribution, that we would be able to basically have this margin of error. But basically, it's just there as a way, and it's in this type of study, you always want to kind of compare and see which data is more valuable than others. As you can see, if you go down here, there's one that's like, here's like, for example, this one right here. It's $219 a square foot plus or minus 165. Well, that's not going to be too valuable. The reason either being because it has a really large standard deviation or there's a really small number of projects. So that was our, in an attempt to be as ethical as possible and to tell the board basically, some of the stuff's more meaningful than others. We put that in there. But the items with a really small margin of error are probably going to be pretty close. So so anyways, and that's all that's basically just the overview of the report since I know it's so new. So.
Are there any sections of the report that anyone would like us to go into more detail about as far as was describing it? If not, then we can go straight to questions.
Our Appendix E.
Actually, I would go to...
Appendix E is... You want to identify specific projects, or do you want to look at
he just wants
general category?
The permanent new schools. Let me just answer that. If you go to page... Let me go up here. Okay, so if you start here on page, actually go to page 18. Take it back. Sorry about that. Page 19. So first of all, these two charts, just for these two charts are permanent new schools.
But there's that descriptor. Is not something that necessarily identifies all schools that were built considered to be complete schools.
These are all of the schools in our study.
But what is your definition of permanent?
Permanent construction would be...
Self-identified by districts based on classroom construction type.
Okay, so that permanent construction could include a stick-built building, could include modular building, could include a portable building.
Modular and portable are both independently identified. Classroom construction, these would be just classrooms that were indicated, all of which are permanent.
Permanent, and it'd be on a permanent foundation.
I think they're not hearing what you're saying, John.
The definition we use for permanent construction is portable and modular constructions, because we have the three different identifications in the PIW.
I saw that.
Is based on the construction type of classrooms. If the district built with both permanent and portable classroom type and identified that in the PIW, that would be in a separate category and not considered to be permanent construction.
That out. So, and you can
There's
see.
So
if you go to
on page 10 called construction type, and you can see there's a category called combination, which refers to those projects that were part permanent and or portable and modular.
How
but
far?
I think I can. Let me just answer your question first before I go too much further. Page 21. This is our descriptive table. So if you say construction cost per square foot, and you can see there's actually a footnote down at the bottom, we've taken out of this particular chart, because this chart is the subset data, we've actually excluded 3 K6, 178, and 1912 projects are not included because they're combined construction type. So if they included modular and permanent, or modular and portable, or portable and permanent, we took it out. So if you take a look at this top line, it says permanent new site, meaning that this new site means it's a new school, and it means that it's permanent construction. So.
And then you have portable new site that's right below that.
Yeah, and there's 0. So if you look, there's 14 here. So here's where you're going to get the mean cost per square foot was $597. The median was $693. So it's actually right skewed. And what that means is there's actually a larger percentage of projects that are on that are less, it's kind of, let me see, We described it better here. Right skewed meaning there's a larger percentage of projects that are less than the median, so the projects that are more than the median are kind of driving, wait a second, did I say that backwards? Yeah, I said that backwards.
There are more projects to the right of the mean.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Did we even say right skewed?
While you're looking at that,
Yeah.
how far back does this data go? What's the oldest project?
Oldest project would have been funded July board 2006, after the addition of the AB 127, 7, 7, and 4, and general site.
The reason for that is because we're trying to study, because the legislature gave the projects the boost in July of 2006, so now we're assuming that all projects after that are going to have that boost, so we're trying to study what the costs of construction versus the funding after that point in time. So that's kind of how that came about. But
And the,
Yeah.
and the majority of the projects in the data set were
Actually,
in
that's
06, 07, 08. There was a very minimal number of projects. Maybe there was one in 2004, something like that?
there was
Or a couple-
there was a
it's just
few.
a handful. So the majority of projects, based on the simple fact of when PIW was implemented, are 2007 and 2008 projects.
What I'm not clear on is if a school district found that it was, and we've seen this happen, and you've heard me speak of this to the allocation board, where a school district found that it needed to make adjustments in its plan, and it may be intended to build a school that was stick-built that would be permanent, but they built a school that is intended to be permanent, but it wasn't stick-built because of the need to go to modular to be able to afford the school, or even to individual portable classrooms to afford the school. Does this data differentiate that in terms of a new school where it's stick-built construction, new school where it's modular, or new school where there is portable? And I realize that you've got the intermixing as well, but would I be able to pull that out of this report?
You will be able to look at the differences in funding costs and funding and costs for permanent for projects that were new site and permanent, new site and modular, and new site and portable. But we have not identified specific projects that at one point during the construction process transition from one to the other.
And it's not during construction. It's basically districts had been approved for one, and you may not know the difference because they simply built the same number of classrooms, unless that would be reported to you.
We would know what they spent, but we wouldn't. You couldn't identify a project in the sample that had been transitioned during the design process or any stage from one full planning to another full planning.
But we're assuming that what they would report would be what ultimately got built, right?
And that's why
So,
Correct. Well,
Yeah.
Probably what I need to do is go back to the PIW, look at the basic the terminologies there, and maybe talk with you again about this. But I'm still not clear if I could find out this is a complete school and it's considered to be permanent, but it wasn't stick built. It wasn't built from the ground up. Some of it was built in a factory and for cost reasons brought onto the site, because that does and has happened.
the construction type would be self-reported by the district. So if they reported it was permanent, then we would have it labeled as permanent. If they brought in a modular, then hopefully they would have reported it as a modular classroom, and therefore it would be included in the modular section.
Okay. And how do you differentiate? I've made an assumption, and maybe that's not a good assumption. How do you differentiate modular from portable?
actually,
Again, is that
You're
difference?
referring to the instructions in the PIW and the district's originally.
So it's simply you're taking off what the district has provided you there.
Yes.
we added just basically modular construction uses prefabricated building components that are assembled on site. Portable construction is a factory-built facility. So, and I believe education code kind of distinguishes.
Education code describes the portable,
Portables.
provides a portable definition.
Yeah, that's been there since about 1986.
Yeah.
The
But I mean, really, what it really comes down to is how do the districts self-report, and hopefully we have enough projects to weed out if there's a couple that were reported wrong, or by mistake they checked the wrong box. Hopefully, we do have that is our largest category is permanent. Well, actually, it's one of our largest categories, permanent new sites. So hopefully that that will drive out a lot of anybody that was confused about the definition, the fact that we have enough in our sample set could take care of some of the fluctuations in the numbers, if that makes sense. So.
Okay, well, you have a lot of information here, and I just actually saw this morning and haven't read it.
Yeah.
So
But we do have that. If you want, but for each grade level, you see this is the first 6 lines are K6, the second 6 lines are 7, 8, and the third 6 lines are 9, 12. So for each year, there's 3 charts: construction costs, funding, and percentage of state contribution. So for all 3 grade levels, the first line would be your permanent new sites, and I'm pretty confident that it's pretty close to all of the permanent new sites will be taken care of. So if that's what you're what you're interested in, that's why we broke it out. So you can actually take that. You can say, okay, for example, 2008, our mean permanent new school sites was $597 a square foot for K6. State funding was $201 a square foot, and percentage of state contribution on average was 37.10%. So, and that's for that particular category. So that's how you would read that. And then we have that for all 3 years. So.
Can you show me the other years?
Yeah.
In the same category?
The other years, 433 for 2007 was the cost. 148 was the funding, and 36% was the average state contribution in 2006. 378. See, and that's what we found really interesting. The cost drove up dramatically over 2 years. 136 was the state funding, and so average percentage of state contribution would have been 36% for that category. So we kind of did that for each category. So some categories the state provided more than 50%. Some categories they provided less. But it's really hard to analyze the why. That's why we included our key findings section. We talked about how a lot of these projects are under requested, about 2/3 of them, meaning that they requested less pupil grants either because that either could be because they didn't have enough eligibility, either they were preserving it because maybe they wanted to build another school later, so they wanted to keep some of their eligibility. Some of the projects were low-cost projects. That's mostly the additions where they had a 60% commensurate issue, so they had to lower their grant request. And what was the other one? Lack of local contribution. So they weren't able to match, so they only asked for what they could match. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm sure I'll have more questions as I go through this, but
sure.
Thank you for answering
Yep.
what I've asked.
Cool.
While you have the mic, could you just follow up for your question about core facilities?
The core facilities?
Yeah, how are we considered, when we say permanent, is that a complete school? Anything, do we know if they had all the core facilities that they wanted?
So with the complete school, or what we would refer to as a complete school, and you've got permanent and new site, what we saw happen during the time frame that you spoke of, and actually before that, was districts that were approved, and as you point out in the report, classrooms are what you look at,
Right.
and what appear to drive the program. So if a district, and I can give you several examples, went to bid and they had site work they needed to do, they couldn't necessarily build all of the buildings, and so they chose not to build a multipurpose room or a library or a gym. There's examples of all of those, and built the classrooms only. We had suggested in the PIW that I think it was on the back page, Josh, that there be information be gleaned from districts about what did they leave off, and why was that? Is that identifiable in here? Is that basically your question, Mayvon? Is that identifiable in here?
The sections we were referring to before, those tables that we were talking about, the average dollar per square foot, those don't differentiate between construction of MEFs or not. If you look at our attachment E, which I was pointing to earlier,
Sorry,
if you break down by individual, you go through and individually identify those new school projects, and then within that section, we have which core facilities were built by each of those projects. So you can go in and you can look at how many of those, what we identified as permanent new school or new sites actually constructed the core facilities. So the information's in there, but it was not used when calculating that table we showed you before.
Okay, so, but you can see that individual by project for all that are there.
For all 166 projects.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll dig
tables
through,
are
but I may,
helpful. You can get a lot from the tables, so, yeah.
but I may need to come back to you gentlemen,
Sure.
ask for.
Yeah, and we do include a table here. We say, like, for example, this data set is 166 projects. 63 of them had multipurpose rooms. So how many were there? Were 43 brand new schools, so 63 multipurpose rooms. So you can kind of see, let me see here if we actually say. Okay, so contained 3,331 structures, 5.5 million square feet were built. More than 80% of the structures in the study are classrooms. And you can go to the table to see which ones, which projects included classrooms, which projects are new schools. So there's quite a bit of data here. These are how many outdoor facilities were built. So, but it's really clear that a lot of the additions projects don't include, these other facilities. So.
And that's huge, as you pointed out, with the 60% commensurate test. That's
right.
Hugely different than building a complete new school.
Right. And if you look here at under requested projects, this is really interesting. So low-cost project, meaning a district has a portable addition to an existing school that could otherwise generate state funding 2 to 3 times the project cost. Districts have to match, so regulations cap the 60% commensurate in the amount of money district can request. So we broke it down here for each year. These are the total projects that under requested grants. These are the total gross expenditures. The number of pupil grants are under requested, which is an estimate to the best of our ability based on loading standards.
Based on what?
Based on the loading standards of the classroom, and it is just an estimate, but it's pretty close. And then there's the amount of funding that was under requested. We broke it down. These are the ones that would have hit 60% commensurate problems. Again, it's an estimate, and these are ones that did it for other reasons. Maybe they didn't have eligibility, maybe they didn't have local funding, whatever reason. So, so there's a lot of stuff here. We basically just tried to do, give everybody as much as they, as much as we could. We wanted everyone to have data so they can take it and make conclusions on what they want to do. So that's kind of our goal, just to give the data. So
just one comment. I don't know how old that little Hoover Commission statement is.
2009 June.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's I think assuming that agreements with architects and structural engineers and construction managers are based on the old model of a percentage. That has been changing during the period of time when we had the high cost of construction and districts having to deal with that. If there was a higher cost for the project, you pay the architect. If you pay on a percentage basis, you pay them more. Many districts have gone to basically a fixed fee. So that would negate that comment from the little Hoover Commission. And it's something you certainly could ask districts about. But this is a complex business which requires a whole lot of decision making, and because of circumstances such as we're in now, where we keep hearing that the bid climate is diminishing, but that doesn't mean that districts are going to have a better time in building, because they may end up having a low bidder who really doesn't know anything about building schools, and that does happen. There are many of us that have experienced that. So my point is that this is not a static process. It's quite dynamic. Anyway, thank you.
Cool.
Well, good afternoon. I have actually spent some time reading your report.
All right.
And read the whole thing this morning. I find that I have some questions for you. Can you hear me now? Okay. My first question I have for you really lies in one of the statements you repeat over and over again in the report, that the funding model is unclear. I'm not quite sure where you're going to that. Are you going to the funding model with regards to facilities or with regards to the way the money is doled out by the State Allocation Board?
I think unclear as far as expectations of what shall be billed with the funding provided.
So that really is that a funding model?
How else would you define it?
For facilities, we're falling right back to the question of what constitutes a complete school, as you have on your page 11. And by the way, as I look at page number 11, okay, you have 3,300 facilities on page 11. One building is one facility. Therefore, there's an assumption that the 2,865 buildings only have classrooms in them. There's no references to whether those buildings have toilets in them, whether they have combined multi-purpose rooms. If you add up the numbers, it does become 3331.
Let me have the team respond to that quickly, how the number of classrooms was arrived at.
That's simply the gross number of classrooms. It does not refer to a classroom building. So if a district were to have built one building with 10 classrooms in it, it would be included in this number of facilities as a 10, not as a 1.
Okay, so then there's a misunderstanding on my part of what you mean by 3,331 structures. To me, a structure is a standalone document.
We had no way of identifying if the district had built one classroom as a one standalone building and 3 next to each other. Or
so these are 2,800 classrooms.
Yes.
Okay. So again, as I read this, I read one structure was equal to one building. Therefore, one building you had 2,800 buildings that had classrooms in it. That's how I read that report. Going back to this other first statement that we come back to is based on unstated assumptions. I'm not sure how we know there's unstated assumptions.
What page is this? I'm sorry.
We're back to the question
I think it's back to the same question.
We're back to the original question about what is an unstated assumption, and then what is the actual school construction practices? You're saying it may not match. We got to have something to compare.
I think that's kind of what we're saying.
I'm just trying to think of it.
yeah.
If I were sitting up on the dais with the other board members, which that'll never happen, but let's assume that I was up there. You know, everybody's agreeing with me. I would be asking the kinds of questions here. What are the school construction practices? Well, how do we know that they don't match? What are the unstated assumptions? What are the stated assumptions? And I have nothing to work that with. It's like there's this nebulous cloud out here I can't grab a hold of. Things that I've also wanted to make mention of is that, you know, if I were sitting up on the dais and you told me that I contributed, that the state's contribution was 108%, I don't think I'd be very happy. But in the sense, really, what we're talking about is the program allows for per pupil grants, site development costs, and site acquisition. You've taken that off the table for the site acquisition, which is appropriate. That was easy to do. But site development cost has always been a cost what it costs, right? It's a number that it is what it is, no matter who builds it, who adds it on there. That hasn't been netted out. But yet you include that number in there and then divide it by the number of square feet that are actually there. That's why you have the disparity between this $99 a square foot through, you know, whatever number, the largest number you have. It throws the wrong information out there, I think, that, okay, are we paying $400, $600 a square foot? And I heard that once in one of the state allocation board members by someone in the audience. I can build a school for a lot less than $900 a square foot. Well, they're not thinking about $900 a square foot of permanent buildings or portable or modular. They're thinking, you guys are talking about that plus site development costs. Right. I think that's got to be paired out somehow. Then you have a little more, I think, apples and apples kind of description, which is kind of what you have in the Saylor description. If you take a look at the Saylor description, which I think is on page 20. Yes. You take a look at what Saylor has indicated here in your document. It says that the elementary school can be built from anywhere from 237 to 279 in 2007. And then you go up from there.
It doesn't. That does not include site development work. So.
Exactly.
We tried to make the disclaimer regarding site development, and we had discussions about that as far as being able to break that out. at the IMP committee, and we try to make a disclaimer throughout this document about the fact that the numbers that are reported in here do include site development. And oftentimes it even includes site development that the SFP regulations wouldn't recognize that the district undertakes on their own dime. So
Right.
we did highlight that. And as far as, apples to apples, we recognize the site development on both the state funding and the cost of the project. So we try to make that as even as possible. But we understand that some of these high dollar figures could be, per square foot, could be attributed to site development.
And I believe they are, like the way you've presented it, and thank you for explaining it.
And we kind of-
I'm showing here, if I take a comparison between 2007 and 2008, you have a 4 to 6% difference increase. If you take a look at 2008 to 2009, which, again, you're saying doesn't include any site development work, that's a 7 to 12% increase. And we're getting that from an independent third party, Sailor, who is somebody you use all the time. And I'm wondering if that couldn't be used as part of your recommendation.
Lord, what are we going to say about that?
Well, our recommendation at this point doesn't include a specific, let's pick this number and go with it as far as cost per square foot for the different types of project as a whole.
Well, then the question, then the next thing would be, well, why do we have hospitals and prisons on this list?
Just for people that, if you have no idea where to start, like what other types of construction are
These would be the other types of construction that are undertaken across the state that have probably very similar requirements as far as how schools have various, like DSA requirements and things like that, high standards for construction and safety. So these would be the facilities that would be close to schools as far as the level of regulation is concerned.
And just to point out, there already was a 6% increase in 2009, so this will be on top of that if there is another one. So, and we're not really making a recommendation right now. Basically, we're just giving the board this report so they can.
Well, wasn't that
take a look at
increase?
that.
Wasn't that increase that we talked about last, the 127 increase, based on the prior year's increase in the change in costs? That was approved by the board, kind of at the 6%.
Oh no, I'm talking about the 6% in January of this year for that's just the annual construction cost index increase that goes every year.
Okay.
So, and then on top of that, there was the other 6% last year for 2008 for the AB 127. So.
Okay.
So.
I think you have some good, you guys took a long time, excuse me, I'll say it, didn't mean that. I meant that you guys did a lot of work here. There's a lot of numbers crunching here. There's a lot of stuff, and I did a lot of duplicate work in looking at some of the numbers you have. I have additional comments, but, it's just between us here. You guys really put a lot of effort into this thing. I think that you've got some good nucleus for maybe some future legislation, but we still need to get the answer to the board about what percentage we may want to recommend. And I was looking for something in the conclusions that might lead to some kind of an initial recommendation. Are you going to be recommending anything?
The data that we provide just shows such a wide range of projects and a wide range of costs reported that it becomes almost impossible to pick one best solution and possible to pick a number of solutions that would be just as equally fine.
Would you also incorporate the adjustment that the board might ordinarily take in 2010?
Well, this is just overall kind of a weird cycle right now because we are approaching that adjustment in January, yet none of the funding is final for any projects. So not quite certain how they're going to handle that. But given the fact that that's why we wanted to present to the board a history of grant approvals and increases too, because there was, given the fact that we had the 774 and then another 6% and then another 6% for the CCI, that may factor into the decision of whether they want to do another one or wait it out till January to see what happens with the CCI. Hard to tell. We don't have an insight into those discussions.
Well, thank you for letting me ask some questions.
No problem. Yeah, thanks.
Hello.
Hey, Fred.
Hello. You got my name? Do I have to announce myself?
Please do.
Okay. Fred Yeager, Department of Education. I got 4 questions on my first read. A couple. Was there a reference back to the original LAO study that established the SB 50 grants as to what that entailed?
No, not as part of this project, as far as, using it
Right,
specifically.
where the
for
initial number
reference.
came from? Okay. And, okay. So, in this, I know there's not a per-student amount determined, figured anywhere, what that change has been. It's all in square footage, right? Is that,
The initial table that we have about per pupil grants
Let's see here.
does
talking
talk about
about
the,
this table?
this one,
Right,
this
right,
particular one is per pupil grant adjustment, but as far as taking the, figuring in how many pupils were housed in a particular project and what that results in?
right.
No, we have not done that.
So,
This
the
is not part
assumption
of the
if the board
methodology.
wanted to make an adjustment, they could look at one of these tables and say, if the state has been funding 35% of a new school, then we should adjust a grant 15%. Is that sort of the logic that would
If that's what they want
follow
to do.
through, and would that match presumably the per-student amount, I would guess? So, okay. And then just one number did seem odd to me on page 11, that, and maybe I'm reading it wrong. Average square foot per classroom is 1,300 square feet. See,
Where was this again? I'm sorry.
page 11 on table 3, sorry.
Give us a second to navigate.
That one there. You just,
11.
yeah. Just seems,
That's what they reported. It does seem rather high. It does seem a little high.
right.
I don't know if that includes,
Yeah, so how that reads is out of the 2,900 facilities, percent of the facilities means 86% of what? Of all the projects included classrooms. Is that what that's?
of all the facilities, 86% of the facilities reported.
Right. And those facilities totaled 3.7 million, and then 68% of 3.7 million was classrooms? Is that sort of how that?
No, 68% of the 549 million. So if you look at there's a total number of facilities,
Okay, I
and
see.
at the bottom is the total, and the percentage refers to that
68%
first
of the
total.
total square footage built was for classrooms.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
But remember, too, that this is a very, not a very detailed
Right, right,
statistic
right, right.
as some of the other
Yeah.
ones we have. It takes just a few large science classrooms and you're, over your 900 square foot standard, or 960, whatnot, for portables. So this particular statistic does not give you the insight that other numbers do, like standard deviation, mean and median. This is just your most basic arithmetical average.
We kind of didn't, we just wanted to keep it very high level, but we did want to give them this information just so they can this is kind of painting a picture, I think.
And,
So,
and then perhaps
yeah.
as a useful comparison, looking back to the old historical distribution of the LPP square footage, where it would be roughly
Which was right here.
60% of the space would have been for the classroom at the elementary, and the other for the support. So there may be some analysis here as to whether certain things are being shortchanged. Then let's see.
Right, this is exactly the type of discussions we're trying to
So-
get going.
I didn't get much time between the World Series to really plow into it. And the Little Hoover statement, in looking back on, and I believe that was in June they released, they also mentioned something else in that statement, and that wasn't included here, about mass buying capacity.
About what? Say again?
That pooling purchasing for air conditioners, whatever, carpet, could also lead to substantial cost, and that wasn't noted there. And then I know the project information worksheet asks about reuse of plans. Was that tested as to being a significant change in cost? So out of the 43 projects out of the new schools, how many of those were reuse of plans, as indicated on the, and did that mean anything statistically?
We did look at it initially. It was not included in the final iteration of the data for the report.
Okay.
But yes, we did look at it. I don't.
Oh,
I don't,
whether it supports that Little Hoover finding, or?
I don't recall. I'm sorry.
All right.
But we could
Yeah.
certainly go back and investigate if
All right.
that would be an interest to the board. We can
That's it for
go.
now.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce Hancock, Hancock Gunnison Park. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you about the report. I first have to admit that I haven't read the report. I've scanned the executive summary and some other parts of the report. And my comment is more, or I have more of a comment than a question, but it concerns the issue of leaving money on the table. I think it's a term that's used in the beginning of the report in the executive summary, and then in other places in the report you talk about projects being, I think right there it's what, under requested, or in other places underfunded. And you give several examples of that happening. Maybe it's a product of how the data comes in, because obviously, for instance, you give one example of a project where the district had a maximum eligibility of 300 pupil units, but built a project with a capacity for 450. Obviously, you need somehow to take that into account. That can't be held as an example of the grants being inadequate to fund, 300 grants being inadequate to fund 450 capacity, obviously. But in the report, it's referenced a number of ways, I think, that almost as though there were some choice in the matter. In other words, almost as though the underfunding of the project, which admittedly needs somehow to be accounted for, was because the district left money on the table. And that's a bit of a problematic position, because it makes it sound like, at least in some cases, the underfunding of a project was something that could have been done otherwise, could have been corrected had the district just done it right. Underfunding or leaving money on the table, to me, would be, an example would be if a district was able to ask for grants for site development but didn't check the box, or didn't ask for the elevator allowance, or whatever it might be, and could have gotten it had they done so, then it would be clear to me that they had left money on the table in that case. But maybe if I'm missing the point, help me understand. But the whole idea that seems to go through the report is that there's an under-requesting and underfunding for 4 reasons, I believe, that you cite. But none of those, I think, are really get to the issue of whether the grants were, adequate to construct the state's project. Obviously, they shouldn't have to be adequate to also construct the district's optional project.
Right.
Well, I think we identified that this issue actually inhibits our ability to be able to state whether or not the funds were adequate or not, and that's why we felt that there's a need to highlight it. I myself did not like the word under-requested, but we couldn't come up with a better word, and that's why we try to give it a very thorough explanation. And even, you see the section being titled Requesting All or Portion of Funding, and we focused on the relationship between pupil grants and the number of classrooms, rather than items such as site development and all the supplemental grants, which we actually hope to address when we're reviewing projects and give the district the full benefit of allowance. And sometimes they waive those allowances for various reasons. So understanding that under-requested may not be a best word, but coming up with a tag for that type of situation was the best we could do with that term.
The problem being that you're referencing, being back to your own example in the report, of a case where a district had only 300 eligibility but had a project submitted to you, or a set of plans submitted to you that had a capacity of 450. That's the problem that you're wrestling with, that you don't have a way to somehow pare that down or prorate it or something easily. The square footage, I guess, which is something that I appreciate that you did, and something that many of us have been kind of championing. I think that sort of gets past that problem because, at least I hope it does, because you know the square footage of the whole project and you know the cost of the whole project, not just the state portion, and therefore you come up with a cost per square foot that should be reflective of both pieces, the state piece and the district piece, at least to some degree. But I guess just wanted to express a little bit of a feeling that could be a little misleading to folks who are not really familiar with the program when they read that districts left money on the table. When they didn't leave anything that they had entitlement to, or probably they did, but that wasn't part of the study. And it could lead folks to believe that there's an easy answer, and that is that if people just filed their applications correctly, we wouldn't have a funding problem. And I know that's not what you're trying to say, but it just struck me as just not quite accurate in a sense. But I do recognize the problem you're trying to wrestle with. One last thing. It's something that I kind of go on about a lot, and that is, what is the definition of a project when we talk about it? And in my mind, it's always been what the state funds. But I think often it's used to represent what's in the plans.
You're saying, what do you say again? What, by definition of a project?
Yeah.
Okay, meaning what, by a project you mean what it's supposed, or what kind of the standards are, or I'm confused?
You mean that if a district just submits plans with 15 classrooms, but only requests for 10, that the project is 10 classrooms,
Yes.
and then the district has a separate project of 5 classrooms?
You could put it that way. And you know what? It's not a major point. It's something that comes up, in my mind, comes up over the last few years. It's come up a number of times where OPSC sometimes will refer to what's in the plans as the project, when really, in my mind, it's what the district is eligible to file for.
So a set of plans will include, for example, 5 new classrooms and a career tech classroom, and the career tech classroom's not being funded. It's being funded somewhere else, so that wouldn't, okay.
Or
right.
not funded
Okay.
at all.
Gotcha, yeah.
You know,
That is very problematic.
it's not a major point. It's just being careful about the term. If you're not careful about the term, if we're not careful about it, we can get into confusion about what we're actually talking about. Thanks very much.
Bruce I too was struck by the leaving money on the table, and I was kind of, I haven't read the study completely, so I wasn't quite sure what explanation there might be for that phenomenon. But hearing the exchange just now, it makes me question whether or not one conclusion from recognition that that the projects that are being built are greater than the funding that's being provided could be that our eligibility calculations aren't truly capturing the full extent of the need out there. I don't think I saw that in the report, but when, you know, would you consider that to be a possibility too for districts not coming in for you know, if they're building a project for 450 pupils, but they're only coming in requesting 300 pupil grants? I heard you say one explanation might be that they don't have more local match. That's as far as they could go, but
Well, this would be the relationship between the state loading standard and the number of classrooms in the project. And we bring up eligibility in that respect to highlight the fact that sometimes the district's baseline eligibility due to various adjustments may be only 300 pupils, and those are the pupils that they will take.
yeah.
So that is the reason why the district's baseline eligibility could be only 300, they vary. As you know, we start with the enrollment projection, which we discussed thoroughly when we did the implementation of AB 1014 as far as how accurate are we with our numbers for different types of districts. But then a number of things happen. District construct projects. District may have projects that start but don't go forward. They do the reduction to cost incurred. There could be a number of different things. The regulation section that governs adjustments is, I think, approaching 2 pages long at this point. So you're correct that it starts with the projection, and the projection is only as good as the projection could be because it's a statistical estimate. But there are a number of things that happen that may result in the district's eligibility being lower than they wish for it to be to fund a certain project.
Okay.
And also, just for formality, could you say your name for the record?
Mayvon Garrity with Senator Lowenthal's office. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Lyle Smoot, Los Angeles Unified School District. I'm sure that we will dissect, all of us will dissect this report a few hundred more times in the coming weeks and months, and so I want to say that I think it's great that we have as my good friend Bill Van Gundy used to say, a plan to deviate from. So I'm glad to see this report come out, and I just have a number of questions so that I'll know what I'm looking at as I'm going through the report in detail. It says there's 166 projects, and those are split between permanent and all kinds of things, and new construction, new schools, new sites, and additions. How are those 166 projects chosen? Is that in here someplace? I admit I haven't read the report in detail, so I'd just like to know, are the 166 projects, is that representative of every PIW? Yeah. That was sent in after July of 06, or is that representative of some subset? And if so, how were the 166 chosen?
As we discussed at implementation, we started with the PAWs that have been submitted starting July 1st, 2008 through March 31st, 2009. We pared that down to projects that were funded after July 1st, 2006, as in they had been eligible for the 7%, 7%, and 4% increase, and general site, not to say that they requested general site, but that they were eligible for it, that it was in the mix. We then utilized the categories that were discussed at IMP. We removed all SDC-only classrooms, those projects that received full financial hardship, use of grant projects.
Okay, so it is explained in the
it is all
report.
explained.
That's fine. As long as it's explained in the report, when I go through it in detail, that's all I need to know.
And then there's even a little chart here for each project that was excluded.
Okay. Now, out of those, these are PIWs, how many of those were 100%? All of them?
You mean full 100%?
100% completed projects.
We did not break down. Once we excluded the project, we didn't seek to break it down any
So
further.
these could be,
Estimates and...
it could be the first one or the second one or the last one, you don't know.
Because they didn't, because they met categories that we discussed at implementation committee for exclusion.
And of course, one of the reasons I ask that is because we have a lot of concerns about the first two being based on, like you just said, estimates, incomplete projects, et cetera, et cetera. So I just would like to know that, if possible.
Actually, it's been a while since we did this section. On page 54, we have Appendix E, but on page 154, there's a
Put it
category.
on there for me.
Yeah.
I didn't even print a report out. My
Oh, yeah.
You were
printer
asking
ran
us
out of ink.
You were asking us about projects that were excluded. So for that one, we showed you one attachment. For the projects that were included in the study, they're listed, and
complete right
and you
here.
can see
Okay.
percent complete on this.
5005 means it's-
it's
So we can go through and add them
indirectly-
up. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
indirectly you can get there.
Okay, that's good. That's all I need to know. You stated that the state funding provided up to 108% of the project cost?
That was the min and max, correct?
Yeah,
For
and
one-
I'm just wondering, did you study any of those that got more than whatever? Because if you look at the commensurate test and how it works and what that means, it shouldn't be, there should not be a way that the state can provide more than, I think it's 83% of the construction cost. So there's no way you can get to 108% of project cost based on the commensurate test unless one of two things happens. Either the project scope is substantially reduced or you get an unbelievably good bid based on the estimate. I'd just like to know if you've actually looked at any of those that come out at high percentages to see how does that happen, because it's impossible if everything is working.
Right.
We haven't specifically looked at those, but
Okay. Are you going to?
there's probably a number of different things that the board could ask us to look at after this, after they see this report. So if this is one of them, we'll definitely explore it.
Yeah.
This is not to say that our work is done.
Okay. Now, would you mind turning to putting that on page 23 for a second? And this kind of goes back to something Tom was talking about, and I think Fred too. If you look at the permanent new site there, the mean state funding is 37%.
The one for K6 on top?
Pardon?
The one for K6?
Yes.
So this
Is that page 23?
in case anyone can't read it, this is 2008 percentage of state contribution.
Right. If you look at page 26 and 29, you'll see that the other years are represented. But if you look at permanent new site, you get 37%. Down below 5 or 6 lines, you get permanent new site at 32%. And further down, you get permanent new site at 39%, which is, pretty much what we in Los Angeles are finding. If it actually, we're finding that our percentages for those years are worse than that. They're getting a little better because we are getting better bids now. But then to represent, and this is, I think, one of the things we were talking about in the implementation committee, to represent that the overall average is 47.64%, I think is misconstruing the reality of a permanent new site complete school, and I think those numbers clearly show that. So I just want to point that out, that those numbers and their relatively small numbers of projects are very concerning.
The 47.64% represents a weighted, so that average is weighted. So the 37.1% at the top is weighted based on the 14 count, while the 40.59% below it is weighted at the 7 count. So the 47.64% isn't a flat average. Those three numbers you provided are included in that at a weight that in which they're represented in the overall sample.
But if you are interested, we also do have a flat average on page 18. So for 2008, so just in case, so we have that too. It's actually turned out pretty close, but that's why we broke it down like this, so people can take this chart and go to whichever category they want. And
well, we will obviously be doing that in the coming days and weeks and months as we go through this thing. I just want to point out to you that it looks to me like there's a pretty clear statement there right from your charts. Even if these are based on PIWs that don't represent complete projects, and typically I think your complete project PIWs are going to be 10 to 20% higher than the earlier ones. Personally, I just think that's an interesting outcome. So that's it. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? All right, shall we call it a day? Thank you all for coming. Oh, one more? Okay, no problem. We have the time.
I'm just wondering,
Mavon, I'm sorry, but we do have people in the audience. Okay.
I just wanted more information about the charts on page 19. I don't really...
Okay, so there's a request for more information or description maybe about our charts on page 19. Is this what you're looking at?
Yeah,
This one?
I guess I'm just not...
sure.
We'll have the, we'll see if we can magnify it and walk through it maybe with an example, guys.
Yeah, these are basically...
Pick a number.
These are all permanent new schools, permanent construction, new schools, was it for a given year, Josh?
No, it's all.
It's for all. Yeah, just the overall, all of them. And what it does is on the bottom, it lines up the dollars, and then each of the blue line represent a count. So for example, this blue line, right, and this is cost per square foot. So for example, 6 projects, you see number 6, you follow it down. This is about 420. So 6 projects were pretty close to $420 a square foot. So this just takes every project that was a permanent new school site and measures it up how much it costs per square foot. And then what this purple line does, it's a cumulative total. So if you, I'm going to back it out just a bit here. So if you want to know 50%, over here is a percentage. So I'm going to follow it all the way over, and approximately right here is the 50% mark. So, which is what, about 480 it looks like? So it looks like about, this is about the halfway point. So it just kind of, and then if you go to the next chart, it's
So
the same
does it-
thing for funding.
Can you back up just a little
Yeah.
bit? So would it be fair to say that in this particular group of projects, the first 50% of projects, if we arrange them from lowest to highest by cost per square foot, reported a cost per square foot of $480 or less? So that's what the pink allows you to do. That's why you go from 0 to 100%. So it shows you on aggregate what that's, and you could see the counts, and the sample size here is not, it's 43 new schools. Okay? Go ahead.
Yeah, and then this one down here is the funding. So the funding is much, it's interesting, the funding is much more standard, or I guess normalized is the right word, but basically you see it forms more of a curve. It's clumped more in one spot, so it's way more predictable. Thank you, Josh. That's the word I was looking for. So, but you can see the funding goes anywhere from 120 all the way up to $320 a square foot. And then this is the same graphs. We just superimpose them on top of each other so you can kind of see.
Anybody else? Okay.
My questions earlier were really about the complete school or the whole school site acquisition, and Josh, you ran down through those percentages that were identified as means, and they were all in the 30s, and Lyle referred to them again. I don't know if you mentioned page 18 earlier when you were giving your summary, but you've got here a state contribution percentage in Table 7 of 52.9% under a mean.
For 2006.
In 2006, and then you drop to 2007, and it's 50.33%. So just numbers and statistics are funny things, and they sometimes give you sort of weird answers. But how could you explain that the state contributed more than 50% when all the limiters are in the program to forestall that kind of thing happening? Can you give me the mathematical?
This chart on page 18 includes all projects, including additions.
Right,
so,
but
including
still,
portables.
52%?
Right, on average. So if you take, what we did was we took the percentage of state contribution for each project individually and divided, and then, what do you do? You add that up, right? We added that up and then divided by the number of projects.
Can you start again?
Take the percentage of state contribution for each individual project, add those up, and then we took a mean. So that's how that was derived. So it's basically an overall, and so a lot of these projects are additions. I think about 2/3 of them are additions.
Well, you've got a nice graph in here that identifies exactly that.
So that's what that means.
The two-thirds of this is on page 10, that 67%, right at 2/3, 112 projects were additions, whereas what you refer to as new site were 54 projects, 33% of those that were looked at. We don't want to mislead policymakers about that the program is overfunding, but the fact that you have a predominance of projects that are additions, and with some of the qualifiers you talked about earlier, the districts aren't always asking for all of the funds. They may not have local funds to match. They may not want to use all their eligibility. All of those kinds of things mean that there's flexibility within the program, which is something that I think districts like to have. But what we've consistently said about the program, since Cash has done studies on this, in fact we looked at this at the same time you were, we come to the conclusion that you come to on the permanent schools, where the state funding level is in the, it's low. That it's not that you're off the mark. That 36% number seems to be fairly consistent across those 3 years. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions? All right. I'd like to thank staff and those that helped us set up this meeting. Again, sorry about the short notice, but we are glad that the report is out. So thank you, guys. See you later.